Darren Locke had $34 to his name, a 7-year-old son with a loose front tooth and a science fair project due tomorrow, and now, because the universe had a sense of humor, a designer purse sitting on the passenger seat of his battered Honda Civic. He stared at it like it might explode. "I told you, we should have just left it at the cafe," Weston said seriously from the back seat, hugging his monster truck backpack. Darren shot him a look in the rearview mirror. "And I told you, buddy, someone's gonna need it." That woman practically sprinted out of there. Bet she didn't even realize she left it behind. Weston's eyes widened. "What if she's a spy?" "She looked more like a lawyer," Darren muttered, pulling out onto the street. Truthfully, the woman hadn't looked like anyone he'd ever met. She was dazzling, poised, polished, like she belonged on the cover of a magazine. Her heels had probably cost more than his rent, and her purse? The gold emblem read Chevalier, the kind of brand he only knew from the glossy pages his ex used to drool over. Still, he'd seen the panic in her face when she rushed out. Then the purse had been there, abandoned on the table next to the untouched cappuccino. He hadn't even meant to find it, but Weston spilled his apple juice, and by the time Darren was mopping it up with napkins, there it was. "Let's just drop it at the front desk," Weston said, kicking his legs. But Darren was already pulling into a high-rise downtown that looked like it belonged in a movie. "Can't. There's an ID tag inside. Says Naomi Ormond, Ormond Enterprises." He didn't know what Ormond Enterprises was, but the security guy at the front lobby sure did. He gave Darren a once-over frayed hoodie, paint-stained jeans, and a tired face, then looked at Weston and hesitated. "You here to see Miss Ormond?" the guard asked. Darren held up the purse. "Just returning this. She left it at the Brick House Cafe." The guard picked up the phone, spoke quietly, then nodded. "Take elevator 14. Top floor." Darren blinked. "Seriously?" Ms. Ormond asked to see whoever brought it. Darren looked down at his clothes. "I'm not exactly," she insisted. "Dad," Weston whispered, tugging on his sleeve. "I think she's rich. Like, real rich." Darren gave a dry laugh. "You think?" They stepped into the elevator, and Weston's jaw dropped as the doors closed. "It's got a TV in it." Darren just shook his head, nerves kicking in. All this for a purse? Couldn't she just thank him over the phone? The elevator doors opened into a glass-walled office that stretched across the entire floor. The skyline glittered behind it, and Naomi Ormond stood in the center of it, all arms crossed, expression unreadable, wearing a fitted navy dress that looked like it belonged in Paris. She turned as they stepped in. "You're the one who brought this?" she asked, walking toward them, heels clicking. Darren swallowed. "Yeah. You left it at Brick House Cafe." "I know. I realized halfway to my car," she said, taking it gently. "Most people would have handed it to the staff. Or kept it." "I'm not most people," Darren said before he could stop himself. Naomi's gaze flicked to Weston. "And you must be his partner in crime." Weston beamed. "I'm Weston. I told him you might be a spy." She smiled for the first time, and Darren felt his brain short-circuit. "Well, Weston, I'm not a spy. Just a very forgetful CEO." "You're CEO?" Weston said, eyes huge. "Like, of a real company?" Naomi dropped to a crouch to meet his eyes. "That's right. I run a tech company. We build software that helps hospitals run better." "Whoa," Weston breathed. Naomi stood up and looked at Darren again, a little differently this time. "Thank you for bringing it back. That was honest of you." Darren shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. Didn't seem right to leave it. Most people don't do the right thing when no one's watching. He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. Naomi hesitated. "Do you have time for coffee?" "I feel like I owe you." Darren blinked. "What now?" "I don't bite," she added, and something about the way she said it made him feel like the floor shifted beneath him. "Unless you're late for something." He glanced at Weston, who was now staring at the massive conference table like it was made of crystal. Actually, Darren said, we were just heading home. Homework and all that. Naomi's eyes softened.
Right.
Of course. She walked to her desk and scribbled something on a card.
Here.
If you ever need anything or just want that coffee, call me. Darren took it, feeling the weight of the thick paper. Naomi Ormond. Her number was scrawled beneath it. They left a moment later, and Weston was quiet until the elevator doors closed again. Dad, he whispered. She totally liked you. Darren laughed. She was just being polite, buddy. No way, Weston said. She smiled at you. The kind of smile Mom used to do before she made you pancakes. Darren shook his head, pretending not to let the words land the way they did. But that night, while Weston snored softly in bed and Darren rinsed out the last of the day's dishes, he looked at the card on the counter. He didn't call. Not that night. Not the next one either. But 3 days later, when Weston's sneakers split open and Darren had to choose between groceries or glue, he pulled the card out of his wallet and stared at it like it held the answer to something bigger than a thank you. He didn't want a handout. And he definitely didn't want to be the guy who chased a pretty woman just because she had money. But her smile had been real. And something about the way she looked at him made him feel like maybe for once he wasn't invisible. So he took a deep breath, grabbed his jacket, and said to Weston, "You up for that coffee with the spy lady?" Weston grinned. Told you she liked you. The second time Darren saw Naomi Ormond, she was standing barefoot in the middle of a chaotic kitchen, wielding a whisk like a weapon. "This is not going according to plan," she muttered, eyeing a bowl of chocolate batter that had overflowed onto the marble counter. Darren blinked. "Did we catch you in the middle of a hostage situation?" Naomi looked up, startled, then let out a laugh, a real one, the kind that tumbled out of her without polish or pretense. "Only if you consider cupcakes a threat to national security." Weston peeked around Darren's leg. "It smells awesome in here." Naomi gestured them in, brushing a streak of flour off her cheek. "Come in." "I forgot how fast baking can escalate when you don't actually know what you're doing." Darren stepped into the penthouse kitchen, which looked like it belonged in an architectural magazine. Sleek black counters, warm lighting, and a view of the skyline that made him feel like he'd stepped onto another planet. "I thought CEOs had personal chefs," he said, helping Weston out of his jacket. "They do," Naomi replied, lifting her chin with mock arrogance. "But mine's off today, and I decided I could handle a batch of cupcakes on my own." "How's that going?" Weston asked, climbing onto a stool. Naomi looked at the mess, then back at him. "Let's just say I'm humbled." Darren chuckled. "You really invited us over for this?" Naomi tilted her head. "I invited you over because I wanted to thank you properly. The cupcakes were supposed to be a bonus." He looked at her, trying to figure out how someone like her could be so put together one moment and so human the next. She had on a soft sweater and jeans, her hair swept up in a way that looked effortless, but probably wasn't. She didn't look like a woman who ran a tech empire. She looked like someone trying to prove something to herself, maybe more than anyone else. "Can I help?" he asked. Naomi handed him the whisk. "Be my guest." "I think the batter's salvageable." "Probably." Weston leaned over the counter. "What kind are they?" "Triple fudge with caramel centers," Naomi said, washing her hands. "Or that's what the recipe said." "I might have." "Improvise." Darren laughed. "You improvised in baking?" "I lived dangerously." He mixed the batter as she readied the tray, and for a few minutes, it was just the three of them in a rhythm, messy, warm, and oddly comfortable. Naomi handed Weston a spoon with a wink, and he dug in with a grin. "Don't tell anyone I let you eat raw batter," she said. "My lips are sealed," Weston promised, chocolate already on his cheek. When the cupcakes were finally in the oven and the kitchen was mostly cleaned, Naomi poured 3 glasses of milk and set them on the island. "I don't usually do this," she said, sitting across from Darren. "Bake. Invite people into my home. especially not people I just met. Darren nodded slowly. You strike me as someone who keeps walls up. Naomi's eyes searched his face. You're not wrong. Why us? She exhaled. Because that day at the cafe, I was having the worst morning. Everything was falling apart. And then you showed up. No agenda, no expectations. Just decent. Darren took a sip of milk, unsure how to respond to that. Most people see me and they want something, Naomi added. A meeting, a favor, an investment. You had every excuse to walk away with that purse. But you didn't. I wasn't raised that way. Naomi rested her chin on her hand. How were you raised? Darren hesitated. By a mechanic and a school secretary. We didn't have much, but we had rules. Don't steal. Don't lie. Show up. Naomi smiled faintly. They sound like good people. They were. My dad passed a few years back. Mom moved in with my sister in Denver. And Weston's mom? She asked gently. Left when he was 2, Darren said, not flinching. She wanted something faster. Easier. Naomi studied him. And you stayed. He's my son. That's not always enough for some people. It is for me. There was a long pause. The oven beeped, but neither of them moved. Naomi looked at Weston, who had fallen into a sugar haze on the couch with a blanket and a cartoon playing softly. You're doing a good job, she said quietly. Darren looked down. Most days I feel like I'm barely holding it together. You're here. That counts for more than you think. He looked at her, really looked, and saw the weariness behind her eyes. Not from lack of sleep, but from carrying too much alone. You know, he said, you don't have to bake cupcakes to impress people. Naomi laughed under her breath. It's not about impressing you. No. It's about remembering who I used to be. Before boardrooms and quarterly reports. I used to love baking. My mother and I used to do it every Saturday morning. Darren nodded. That's a good reason. She stood, walked to the oven, and pulled out the tray. The cupcakes were lopsided but golden, the caramel bubbling slightly at the tops. Not bad for a first try, he said. Not bad for a control freak, trying to let go. They both laughed. When he finally stood to leave, Weston still half asleep in his arms, Naomi walked them to the elevator. Will you come back? She asked before the doors closed. Darren looked at her, the city lights casting gold across her face. If you keep baking like that, he said, we might have to. She gave a soft laugh, one hand on the frame. But even if you don't, he added, yeah, I'll come back. The doors closed, and Naomi stood there for a long time, the scent of chocolate and caramel still lingering in the air, wondering when the last time was that someone had said they'd come back and meant it. It started with a single phone call. Naomi's voice had been quiet, almost hesitant. Are you free this Saturday? Darren had been in the middle of patching a leaky pipe under the kitchen sink, wrench in one hand, Weston humming along to a cartoon in the background. I can be, he'd said, wiping his hands on a dish towel. What's going on? There was a pause. There's a charity benefit. Black tie. I don't usually bring anyone, but I'd like you to come. He blinked. You want me at a black tie event? I'll handle everything, she said quickly. Transportation, wardrobe, it's just a few hours. His first instinct had been to say no. He didn't own a suit. He didn't know how to make small talk with millionaires. And he definitely didn't belong anywhere near chandeliers and champagne fountains. But Weston had looked up from the couch and said, Are you talking to her again? Do we get more cupcakes? And Darren had found himself muttering, Yeah, I'll go. Now, 5 days later, he stood in the middle of a luxury dressing suite on the 5th floor of a boutique he hadn't known existed, staring at his reflection in a mirror too tall for any reasonable human being. The tux fit like it had been made for him, which apparently it had. Naomi had sent a tailor to his apartment 2 days prior. In the span of half an hour, Darren had been measured, fitted, and told not to worry about a thing. The tux had arrived that morning, boxed and pressed like it belonged to someone important. "You're going to look like James Bond," Weston had said with a grin while brushing his teeth. And now, staring at himself under warm lights, Darren barely recognized the man in the mirror. A knock came at the door, and a boutique employee, a woman with sharp nails and a headset, peeked in. "Your car is waiting, Mr. Locke. Ms. Ormond asked me to remind you that your table is near the art installation." He blinked. "There's art." She gave a polite nod and disappeared. The black town car was parked outside, engine running. The driver opened the door without a word, and Darren slid inside, trying not to wrinkle the jacket. His fingers tapped against his knee the whole ride, nerves buzzing beneath his skin. He'd left Weston with his neighbor, Mrs. Albright, who had promised to keep him up with movies and popcorn until Darren returned. Still, he couldn't shake the discomfort of being so far removed from his usual world. The car pulled up to a historic hall with stone columns and a red carpet stretching across the entrance. Flashbulbs blinked on either side, photographers calling out names Darren didn't recognize. He stepped out, shielding his eyes against the lights. A valet took the car before he even turned around. Inside, the air was cool and perfumed, the lighting golden and deliberate. Waiters in white jackets floated past with trays of flutes and hors d'oeuvres that looked like art projects. He froze at the edge of the room until he felt a touch on his arm. Naomi. She wore a sleek black gown, her hair swept back into something elegant, earrings catching the light like falling stars. Her hand stayed lightly on his forearm, grounding him. "You showed up," she said softly. "You didn't make it easy to say no." She smiled, her eyes scanning his face. "You clean up well." "I feel like I'm wearing someone else's life." "I know the feeling," she said, leading him toward their table. "But sometimes, stepping into something new shows you who you actually are." The table was tucked near a modern sculpture made of twisted metal and glass. Darren had no idea what it was supposed to represent, but Naomi leaned in. "Apparently, it's about chaos and order." He glanced at it. "Looks like a car crash." She laughed, the sound low and real. "You're not wrong." People came and went, pausing to greet her. Darren noticed how she adjusted when she spoke to them, her posture, her tone, even the way she smiled. It was polished but distant. He leaned over, voice low. "You ever get tired of pretending?" Her head turned slowly. "Every day." As the evening wore on, Darren began to notice more how people looked through him, not at him. How the jokes didn't land the same when he said them. How Naomi's presence protected him from being dismissed entirely. At one point, a man with a square jaw and tailored suit approached their table. "Naomi," he said warmly. "Surprised to see you here. And with company." "Hello, Graham," she replied, tone cool. Graham's eyes flicked to Darren. "Old friend." "New one," Naomi said evenly. Graham offered a hand. "Graham Alcott. Venture Capital." Darren shook it. "Darren Locke. Plumbing and drywall." A flicker of something passed across Graham's face. Not quite disdain, but close. "Ah. Always good to know a man with practical skills." Naomi's hand moved under the table, resting lightly on Darren's knee. "Darren's also raising an incredible son," she said, voice firm. "Weston's a genius with Legos and sarcasm." Graham blinked. "Charming." "Excuse us," Naomi said, standing. "We're going to find the dessert table." As they walked away, Darren let out a breath. "He seems like someone who owns a yacht and names it after himself." "He does," Naomi said. "And he's bitter because I turned down his funding offer last year." "Ah." That explains the subtle condescension. They found the dessert table, rows of delicate pastries and miniature cakes, and Naomi handed him a plate. "You still want to be here?" she asked. He looked around. "I want to be where you are." Her breath caught, just briefly. They stood at the edge of the ballroom, away from the lights, watching people twirl across the floor. I used to think this world was everything, Naomi said. Power, prestige, control. But it's empty without someone who sees me. All of me. Darren turned to her slowly. Then why bring me here? Because I wanted to see if you'd still look at me the same when I'm surrounded by all this. I do, he said simply. You're still the woman who tried to bribe my kid with cupcakes. She laughed, then looked up at him, serious now. I'm scared, Darren. Of what? Of letting someone close. Of trusting the wrong person again. He took her hand, warm and steady in his. I'm not going anywhere. The music shifted into something slower, softer. Naomi looked toward the dance floor, then back at him. I haven't danced in years. Neither have I, he said. But we can pretend. She led him onto the floor, and as they moved together, slowly and without rhythm, Darren realized something terrifying and beautiful. He was falling for her. And if the way her fingers curled against his shoulder meant anything, she was falling too. The next week unfurled in ways Darren never could have predicted, not with a checklist of 1,000 guesses and a crystal ball. It began with Naomi showing up outside his apartment building in a navy sedan, Weston's favorite dinosaur poking out of a gift bag in her hand. I thought maybe we could do something that doesn't involve marble floors or tuxedos, she said as Darren opened the front door, blinking in surprise. He stepped aside to let her in. You want to hang out? Here? I figured I'd see where you come from, she said, glancing around the small living room. Besides, I promised Weston a rematch in Mario Kart. Weston, who had been buried under a blanket with a bowl of cereal, perked up immediately. She cheated last time. I didn't cheat, Naomi said, grinning at him. I used strategy. Same thing, Weston replied, already clearing space on the floor. Darren watched them set up the game, the two of them arguing over controllers like they'd known each other for years. It was surreal. Naomi, in jeans and a sweatshirt, sitting cross-legged on his worn rug, laughing like she didn't have an empire to run. He busied himself in the kitchen, making grilled cheese while they played. The scent of butter and bread filled the room, grounding him. When he brought out plates, Naomi looked up, smiling. You didn't have to cook. It's just sandwiches, he said, handing one to Weston. Besides, I figured you've had enough caviar for a while. She took a bite and closed her eyes. This is better. Later, after Weston had fallen asleep on the couch with his head on Naomi's lap and controller still in hand, she looked up at Darren. Do you ever wonder if you're allowed to have more? She asked quietly. He sat beside her, careful not to jostle Weston. More what? More than just getting by. More than surviving. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. I used to, he admitted. But after Weston was born, I stopped asking. I just focused on doing what I had to. Naomi looked down at Weston, brushing a curl from his forehead. He's lucky to have you. I think I'm the lucky one. When she finally stood to leave, Darren walked her to the door. Outside, the air was cool and still. She hesitated on the threshold. I've been offered a deal, she said. A merger. It would mean stepping down as CEO. He blinked. Seriously? You've worked your whole life for that company. I know. But I don't know if it's what I want anymore. What would you do instead? Her eyes met his. That's the part one haven't figured out yet. The next few days passed in a blur of text messages, shared dinners, and quiet laughter. Naomi started showing up with takeout and stories from her boardroom. Darren found himself looking forward to her knock on the door more than anything else in his day. One evening, as they sat on the fire escape sipping cheap wine, Naomi turned to him. My father built Ormond Enterprises from the ground up. He wanted me to be ruthless. You're not. No, she said. I tried to be. For years. But the truth is, I don't want to spend the rest of my life chasing power. I want something real. Darren looked out at the city, the lights stretching endlessly. Real's complicated. It's messy. It's worth it. He glanced at her. Is this where you tell me you're buying a farm and raising goats? She laughed. No goats. But maybe a slower life. One where I don't have to wear armor all the time. And where do I fit into that? Naomi reached for his hand. Wherever you want to. A week later, Darren received an envelope. Inside was a letter official, embossed and terrifying. A job offer. Senior Facilities Coordinator for a series of transitional housing centers Naomi's company had just funded. Full benefits. Competitive salary. A schedule that let him pick Weston up from school every day. He walked straight to her office, heart pounding. I didn't ask for this, he said once she looked up. I know, she replied, standing. But I'm not giving it to you because I feel sorry for you. I'm offering it because you're good. And because I believe in you. He stared at the letter, then back at her. This changes everything. It doesn't have to, she said. Unless you want it to. What if I mess it up? You won't. I'm not used to being handed anything. Then don't think of it as a handout. Think of it as a door. You choose whether to walk through it. He exhaled slowly. Okay. The next Friday, Naomi stepped into the hallway of Weston's school just as the final bell rang. She waited by the playground gate, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. Weston ran up, backpack bouncing. You came, I promised, didn't I? Darren followed behind, tucking Weston's lunchbox under his arm. Naomi held out her hand. Ready? For what? He asked. She smiled. Our next chapter. They walked down the block together, a strange little trio that somehow made perfect sense. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and rose gold. Naomi reached for Darren's hand. He laced his fingers through hers, and Weston danced ahead of them, humming a song Darren didn't recognize. And for the first time in years, Darren didn't feel like he was chasing after something he couldn't catch. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. Darren unwrapped the last box as sunlight slipped through the new apartment's windows, casting golden slants across the floorboards. Weston was on his stomach nearby, drawing with crayons, the tip of his tongue sticking out in concentration. Is it weird that this place smells like fresh paint and actual possibility? Darren asked, setting the box aside. Naomi leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a quiet smile playing at her lips. I don't think possibility has a smell, but if it did, it'd probably be that. It wasn't the penthouse. It wasn't even fancy. But it was theirs. 3 bedrooms, clean lines, a view of the park, and a kitchen Naomi had declared eminently cookable in, which apparently mattered a great deal to her now that she discovered the joy of Sunday morning pancakes. Naomi stepped into the room and looked around. You really did this. We did this, Darren corrected. You made the calls, I packed the boxes, Weston picked the paint colors, which are suspiciously close to the color of strawberry ice cream. He has refined taste. She walked over and wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head against his chest. I still can't believe you said yes to all of it. Darren kissed her temple. I didn't say yes to everything. Just the things that made sense. The job. The move. You. Naomi tilted her head up. You said yes to me before I even asked, because I already knew. Outside, the city sighed through the trees. Spring had started to crack open the cold edges of the air, and the street below buzzed with soft energy. Naomi glanced out the window, then back at him. I have something for you, she said. If it's another suit, I'm afraid I'll ruin it with drywall dust. She reached into her bag, pulled out a slim envelope, and handed it to him. Inside was a letter. Not typed. Handwritten. Darren, the kind of man you are, the kind who shows up, who listens, who stays even when it's hard, that man changes the way I see the world. You didn't just return my purse. You reminded me that there are still people worth trusting. Worth loving. I've spent so much of my life building things, chasing goals, controlling outcomes. But none of that means anything without someone to share it with. I want to build something with you. Something real. Something lasting. And if you'll let me, I want to wake up next to you every morning, burn the pancakes, argue over paint swatches, and accidentally teach Weston bad puns. If you want that too, I have one more question. Darren looked up. Naomi was holding a tiny velvet box in her palm, breath held. I figured, she said, voice trembling just slightly. If men can propose on rooftops and in football stadiums, then I can do it in our living room. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he cupped her face, kissed her like her question had already been answered, and whispered against her mouth. Yes. I want all of it. You. Weston. Burnt pancakes. Every single day. Naomi opened the box. Inside was a simple silver band engraved on the inside with the words, "You brought me back to myself." She slid it onto his finger, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close as Weston looked up from his drawing. Are you guys getting married or something? Weston asked, pushing his glasses up his nose. Naomi turned toward him. Only if the best man agrees. Do I get to give a speech? You can give 3. Then I'm in. That summer, they married in the community garden Naomi had funded through her company's restructured outreach division. Flowers bloomed along the fences, kids chased each other between rows of vegetables, and Naomi walked down the aisle in a pale blue dress that made Darren forget how to breathe. Weston stood proudly beside him in a matching vest, holding the rings and whispering stage directions like a pint-sized director. After the vows, they danced barefoot under string lights. Naomi leaned into Darren's arms, her head resting against his shoulder. Do you still feel like this isn't your life? She asked softly. No, he said, pressing a kiss to her hair. This feels exactly right. They returned home to their apartment, where Naomi hung Weston's drawing from that day in the living room. It showed the 3 of them, Naomi with a crown, Darren with a toolbox, and Weston in a cape. It was labeled My Family. On Sunday mornings, Naomi burned at least half the pancakes, Darren fixed whatever was squeaking or leaking, and Weston narrated every moment like it was a superhero origin story. And in the quiet moments, when the city hushed and the world felt still, Naomi would curl into Darren's side and whisper, "Thank you for not walking away that day." And he'd always reply, "Thank you for making me stay." They never needed chandeliers or champagne fountains after that. They had each other, and that, finally, was enough.